I've a feeling now I have to stand up and fight someone or something.
Yeah,
I'm like looking around my room, being like, I gotta beat something.
Yeah.
I gotta. And the way I present it to people usually is by getting them to think about insanity. Look at stuff like schizophrenia and psychosis, and it looks like an elaborate problem of the ego. The ego has lost touch with a regulating force that connects it to reality. Sam, do you believe that Christianity was wrong? And it's like, well, how did people get obsessed with that for 2,000 years? People are trapped in this perception of the left brain. And what does the left brain do? It creates missions for itself. What it seems like happened in the West, we live in hell right now. Plan is now we're going to have to try shuttle out of this reality. There's no such thing as someone who doesn't think, quote unquote, religiously. If we can step back and maybe even establish a communication with this unconscious, does that give us the power to actually direct this entire rigmarole? Why is the priests always on top? It's a very, very strange idea.
If people have listened to any of my previous episodes, they'll know this weird part about me.
No bitches worth your juice. That's the right thing. Good job. Tell them are not getting it. No way. No too hot. This is a boys' space, girls.
No
Please
way.
turn off the stream.
You better be on point if you're gonna get some of this juice. Welcome everyone to another brand new episode of Noetic Nomads. I'm Albert Kim, a double shot of espresso in human form. And Boyo alert, because synchronicity has brought me here today with an Irish lad dripping with so much juice, a bead of his sweat would drop my balls and get me pregnant at the same time. Our guest is a storyteller in the proud tradition of his Gaelic countrymen and women, a miner of the shadowy depths of Carl Gustav Jung's work on the collective unconscious, arising out of the darkness with glinting gems bundled in his arms, covered in soot and gasping for breath, yet all with a boyish grin on his face. Through the power of words, images, and mythology, this warrior poet has called to arms a growing army of juicy gents and luscious lasses, raging against the dying of the light, facing off against the dark forces of entropy, and overthrowing the shackles of a slave morality to become masters of their own destiny. Nomads, please help me in introducing an oracle for the coming Ion, a sage putting out the siren call to all those dancing souls sane enough to hear his meaningful music. Representing Dublin, the Republic of Ireland, and now the Nomads family. By day, he goes by Steph, but when the alert goes out, he transforms into the one and only Uberboyo. Thank you so much for coming on today.
I've a feeling now I have to stand up and fight someone or something. You've like hyped me up. I don't know what it is.
Yeah,
I'm like looking around my room unconsciously. I'm being like, I gotta beat something. I gotta take on
Celtic
something.
warrior. That's it.
Excellent job, sir. Excellent job.
So
I think you're the one who should be talking for the rest of this, bro. That was great, man. Well done.
No, I'm not gonna lie. Like looking into your stuff, reading all like your poetry, I was like, I had to step it up for this one. I know I got to step it up for Uberboyo's intro, so that was it. So again, thank you so much for coming on. I know
that was top tier.
Thank you so much.
No, you're all good, bro. You're all good. I think I was going to say to the ladies and gentlemen watching that me and Bertie over here have decided to go with the name Bertie as his alias henceforth. So if you want to go with that, that's a lovely little Irish lilt. He's now qualified himself as an exceptional master of the words, and now he has been dubbed a new name. He's been reborn with a new alias, a new name. This is his new persona going forward.
I have been knighted Bertie by Uberboyo. Thank you. Oh my God. Okay, awesome. So again, thank you so much for coming on today. I'm such like I love your work, and the way that I got into it was actually I was on the Rebelwism Circle community, and then someone posted a link. Oh, here, look at this about the collective unconscious. It was about the national like political and how that all plays into it. I was like, oh, let me check this out, and I was like, what the hell is this? I've never seen anyone go into it like this, like bringing into this artistic stuff and this narrative and like these catchphrases. I was like, what is this? This is amazing. And like, I would just want to know if you could enlighten our audience, like how we came to know each other through a very circuitous, interesting path.
Oh yes, well it's always an interesting one how these things work. So I've been making stuff on YouTube now for probably about 2 years, coming up on 2 years. And I was obviously posting an awful lot about Jung, but I have my own take, you could say, on a lot of this stuff. And it's doing reasonably all right now at this point, and people are like, you know, finding me. I've sort of got like a bit of an audience, a horde of hungry boyos, as they say, a horde of frenzied boyos running around, being like, where's the astral plane? I must find this astral plane that I can break into. And every now and again, like the way I run my sort of, I guess you could say, the business side of things, or the way I run the way that I work with people, because obviously, like, all these type of things tend to lend towards people wanting to actually go into this stuff. I talk to people one-on-one, so I you know, get on the phone and do it old school mode, hopping on the phone, making it human. I'm not a big fan of the whole technical written internet culture. I wait before being on the phone and hearing voices. And so one person I was talking to is like well ingrained with all your stuff. I'm not sure if she would like to get dropped by name, but we'll just call her Wink Monica from Friends. We can go with something like that. Yes. And so she was hanging out, and she came and she called me up, and then there was another gentleman from England called Joe, and these two people reached out to me, and we've been chatting to them, and they sort of plugged me a little bit into what's going on over there, because I've been loosely aware of Rebel Wisdom, and I've been loosely aware of that. I wasn't aware of your stuff before, but I got all hooked up because you're all enmeshed in a sort of grand web, a sort of grand community over in this corner of the internet, I guess you'd say. So I'm not sure if that's the blow by blow exact way it all happened, but that's the sort of general thrust.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we got hooked up by guest number 4 on Noetic Nomads, Monica Bravo. You could check it out. Like, she's on there.
Oh, okay, sweet.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I'm really glad that happened. And then it's funny because like we got in touch, and then right when we got in touch, I was hosting this event on Sunday called the next generation of sense makers and change makers, and you came into it, and I was like, wow. And then we had all these amazing people, and I was just blown away by like all these people who actually agreed to come to my little shindig. And I was just wondering like what was brought up during that event. I was just very curious about like what happened and your thoughts about what went down.
Well, so it was quite late for me, first of all. So it was like I was masked behind darkness. That was the first thing about it. I was sort of like you, but my face was dark as well. Like you've got that black background. I had this just entire. You could just see the 2 eyes, pretty much. That was all it was, and the teeth. But we talked about quite a lot of things. Like, you know, my usual shtick tends to come up, so that was popping up every now and again. But yeah, we were just like popping into rooms and chatting about various things in that regard, and it was good crack.
Yeah, and like one of the prompts is like I'm really curious, because obviously you're into all this stuff, and I'm gonna start getting to, again, like one of the first things I mentioned was like you put out the video on the Stargate project, and I was like, oh my god, this is going back like into my teenage years when I was researching this, so I want to get into that. But like the first prompt that we had during that little gathering was, what's something mind-blowing that you came across recently, whether it was a book, an idea, a movie, a show, anything. So I want to start getting into the Uber's little discoveries that you've come into lately.
Good question. I've come across quite a lot. Like, things tend to move pretty fast with me, and I'm picking up like a lot of new ideas and new perspectives and whatnot quite quickly. The shtick on my channel for the last while has been talking about the brain hemispheres. Now, around about a year ago, someone put me onto the idea of the 2 hemispheres. You've probably heard that cliche conception of the left brain and the right brain being like logic and art. And that's not really true. And there's this dude called Ian McGilchrist, and he proposed that not being true is actually not good enough reason to dismiss this stuff, and that the difference between the hemispheres is very, very significant. It's a big deal. They do radically different behaviors. You could probably even look at it most accurately as 2 beings inside your head, 2 personalities, 2 characters, 2 operant spirits inside your head, and one of them is like an accountant, and the other is like the other is more like a sort of wise general, if you will. That would be the right brain. And so it's not necessarily art and logic, but it's more a sort of stringent way of thinking on one hand, that's very much orientated towards logistics and planning, and the other one would be a lot more about big picture entrepreneur type thinking, and that seems to be the division between the 2 of them. So nonetheless, like, I've talked about this at length. You can check my channel out for it, but the thing that's been getting me interested recently, that's popped up in the last month or so, or 2 months, is the concept of you can get these 2 hemispheres to unite, and then if you combine that with some other neuroscience, such as, for example, brain waves, you see that it's actually possible to get these 2 sides of your brain to talk to each other, and that improves your performance. That improves the ability for these brains to interact with the world. And what do I mean by that? Well, There's various levels of brainwaves. You've got at the very, very bottom, you've got some slow ones. I think they might be called delta. And then they move up various speeds until you get like the alpha brainwaves. That's very, very quick. And then the quickest is these things called gamma. And so the gamma gets the two of them to kind of unify together. And they've discovered in, for example, places like monasteries and monks who've been meditating for many, many years, that they're able to turn on this gamma ray and get the brains to work together instead of working separately, which is what they're designed to do. They work together and it creates a sort of, if you could say, higher consciousness. And this is it's pretty mind-blowing. I don't think people quite understand the ramifications of that, because we're presented culturally, mythologically, mythopoetically, we're presented with the idea that your brain is sort of fixed as it is. It's this sort of scientific paradigm. There's none of this religious nonsense. It's fixed as it is. It's made as it is. And there's not much you can do with that. Like, for example, if you have something like psychosis or schizophrenia or something dangerous along those lines, you're broken. Your depression, you're broken. You've got depression, you're broken. There's nothing you can do about it. It's a fixed conception of what you are. Your mind is trapped within the diagnosis and the prison. And this is very taboo, I know, but all the evidence is starting to point towards the obvious idea that you're actually able to change your mind if you want. And by mind, I mean brain. But brain and mind are related. It's like software and hardware in a computer. Yeah. And so the thing that's been interesting to me is the idea of like, well, what the hell is this higher state of this? Maybe would I dare say ideal state of consciousness? What is this ideal state of consciousness where this higher frequency waves come on board, get the two hemispheres to talk together, and then create flow state? Seems to be related to it. Higher thinking, higher problem solving. For example, gamma appear in brief flashes when you have the eureka moment where something comes together and clicks. And they've studied, for example, in the Buddhist meditators, that gamma wave doesn't come in a flash. It's on all the time at quite high levels, And so you can think about these type of things. Like, why, what does it mean that they're able to do that? And what does it mean based on all our understanding of neuroscience? Like, how does it relate? And I would propose that there's probably many avenues to get there. And so I'm very, very interested recently in charging towards that stuff. High performance, juicy thinking is one thing that I'm going for. So I don't know, does that really count as something mind-blowing? But well, maybe
that's very meta about the mind-blowing stuff, about the mind-blowing stuff. Yeah. There's so many ways that I could just take that, because again, like one of your recent videos was on the Stargate project, and you talked there about hemisync, the synchronization of the left and right brain hemispheres, and how this could, potentiate some sort of, increased capacity, even to perhaps, I don't know, project into an astral realm, into remote viewing. And this is stuff that I was researching back in the day with Russell Targ's book and Harold Putoff on Mind Reach, on the mind control, on the, not mind control, that's a whole nother subject, but on the remote viewing experiments where, Uri Geller and all that. And I was just like, I was very open. I was just like, and I don't know. Fast forward now, I'm hearing more of this work, and this sort of stuff is coming out more and more. And what you actually came out with, because also I'm into the biohacking realm. Now, biohacking obviously is trying to like manipulate the biology to, increase capacity and whatnot. And again, one of it is the brain waves, is, the gamma, alpha, beta, delta, and all those brain waves, and how like by just through like, hooking something up to your head, you stimulate all these different emotions and higher cognitive states. So again, like that's something I'm very into. And what is actually really interesting is, because this is all starting to dovetail right now, is because on the STOA, one of my friends there, Evan McMullen, he gave a talk on the bridge, and how we have this for the past however many hundreds of years, we've been in this very left hemisphere paradigm, from like in the scientific revolution, everything science, and how science is seen as a path. Like you could use science to like get to all the big answers in life. But like what he was saying is like, no, these ancient wisdom traditions, these phenomenological methods of self-inquiry, like a Buddhism, like a Stoicism, like a Gnostic Christianity, they're like orthogonal knowledge quests that are just as valid as science, because science you cannot derive an ought from an is. Unlike what people like Sam Harris and the New Atheists like to say, with like the moral realism. And so he's saying like, in order to really go up the levels of stages of development, like, like the Keegan's stages of development, you actually have to dig into phenomenological self-inquiry, like with these wisdom traditions, perhaps even with, anything from the transcranial, stimulation to meditation to psychedelics. So yeah, I'm very much with your line of thinking in your head right now.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, I've taken all that stuff because this stuff there's so many different directions you can go with this. So first of all, I think I'm quite a reductionist actually in some sense. I would be a big fan of Feynman's attitude towards knowledge, where if you can't explain it to a child, you don't really know it that well at all. So I often try to find the most reduced and basic way of exploring these type of things. So for example, the gentleman called Evan, I think his idea is very, very clever and something that is certainly worth pursuing. And the way I present it to people usually is by getting them to think about insanity of all things, or maybe even something closer to a nervous breakdown. Because the common conception of the idea of the ego is a fascinating conception. Like, what the hell does it mean that I have this sort of ego? And we all use that word, calm your ego down and all this stuff. But implicit within the use of ego in a psychological terms is premised on the idea that Freud presented, where he said there's also an unconscious, and therefore Jung took it on. So there's this bigger mind, there's this subconscious mind, this unconscious mind. And so in our lingo, we use this word ego, but we're not very, very skilled in understanding the implicit opposite, the thing that is defined as also there. And of course, the idea of this subconscious or unconscious or rest of the mind is like very, very easy to understand conceptually, but actually to put it into practice is a very, very hard thing. To actually live as if there's an unconscious mind is a very, very hard thing to do. Now, I think that this is quite an important question, because when you look at what happens when someone has a mental illness of some sort. And no, this is sort of like Boyo science. So I recommend you go check this stuff out and see the perspective I'm bringing and explore it yourself and look at it up, because again, this is like me shooting pretty much from the hip. But you look at stuff like schizophrenia and psychosis and madness, and it looks like an elaborate problem of the ego. It looks like the ego has lost touch with a regulating force that connects it to reality. So what happens when you talk to someone who's got a psychotic delusion and they're like, oh, and I've worked with people like this. Oh, the football team managers are trying to talk to me through the servants in the hospital that I'm in, and they're giving me letters through the food they give me. There's signals in the food. So they give me steak one day, and that's the head manager of the entire nation, who is, the football manager that I like watching or something like that. And he's sent that person to give me this message and all this. And so their ego is there trying to make it's looking for a story in reality, but it's not. It's actually blocked reality out. It no longer wants to see the world as it actually is. It's just stuck in its little prison, its little conceptual prison. Now, this is all a very, very weird and very, very frightening and intense thing when people go through it, but very, very weird because it's so difficult to understand. Like, why does your head go that direction? Why do you get all caught up in some silly story? Why do we get caught up in stories like that? You sit down with someone who's going through that and you're like, yeah, but that's not what's happening. Like, why can't you see what's actually happening? What's going on? Now we dive into the brain, and again, this conception of the dual hemispheres is incredibly important, because if you look at the more conscious left brain, the part of your brain that talks, the part of your brain that has speech, this seems to be not in touch with reality. It has actually got a propensity towards delusion. Now, I would propose, Boyo science mode, that this left brain is the ego. It is the thing that we conceptualize as the sort of centralized self, because the left brain is the thing for a variety of different reasons. And again, check out my channel to check all this. I don't want to burn people's ears off repeating it, that it looks like it's the ego. Now, this other side of your head, this other hemisphere, is actually intentionally divided. And these two parts of your head, they don't work together in unison. They're actually designed to turn one side off while the other side works. They inhibit each other. The corpus callosum, the bit in the middle, inhibits them. And so when you want to use your left brain, your ego, when you want to use your ego, you turn off your right brain, your maybe your unconscious brain. You turn that other side off, okay? And when you turn on your right brain, the left brain gets humbled down. Okay, and the reason why we know this is because when people used to have epilepsy, they used to cut the brain in half. Yeah, that's delightful, isn't it? They used to cut the brain in half, and then what would happen is both of their hands would start doing different things. You would go and you try put on a shirt, and your other hand. So you go reach in with your left brain's hand, your ego's hand, which is the right hand, and you reach in, you grab a shirt, and you're about to put it on. Then the other hand would come up and wrestle it out of his hand and throw it down. This used to happen all the time with people. You'd go to eat a chocolate bar, and the other hand would slap it out and grab an apple. All right, and this is something it's called alien hand syndrome, people were like, what the fuck is going on here? That's crazy. But it's pretty evident. The two hemispheres work together. And when you cut the thing so what does the corpus callosum do? It turns one side off and turns the other side on. So when you cut the corpus callosum, both of them turn on all the time, and they just do their thing. At the intent, like they're fighting against each other. Okay. Now I know I'm building quite an elaborate story here, so you're just gonna have to follow me because it's a complex topic.
I'm with you.
And then what it seems like what happens with the ego, with the something like a psychosis is, of course, well, the right brain's job is to be quiet and sit in the corner, but to keep you in touch with reality. It's a sort of it's the right brain, the unconscious, if you want, is the thing that's in touch with the real world. And so you're regulated by your right brain. It sounds weird, but your right brain is almost like your dad, and you're like your ego. The left brain is like the dog that runs around and like sniffs everything and does all its stuff. The two of them work together, and the right brain goes quiet, and then when it's time, it disinhibits the left brain perhaps and comes online and tells the ego, shut up, I'm going to take control here, and directs it in a different perspective. It has that type of function, it seems. They've got many experiments with this as well, where, for example, they sit down with people who have these hemispheres severed, and they can ask questions to each side. And if they ask questions to the left hemisphere, they're usually delusional and self-aggrandizing, egotistical, if you will. And whereas the right brain is a lot more humble and in touch with reality and down to earth, and less so self-obsessed, if you will. And so it seems to look like these two have separate personalities, and they have separate functions. And the way this function works together is the general and the soldier. The left brain is like the soldier, the right brain is like the general that tells the soldier what to do, but doesn't actually do any of it himself. He doesn't do the dirty work. Now, in something like a psychosis, what may be happening is that people are trapped in this perception of the left brain. And what does the left brain do? It's not in touch with reality, and it creates missions for itself, like a soldier would. It creates missions for itself and ways of figuring out plans and whatnot. And so when it's trapped into that, it gets trapped inside its mission. Its mission is out of touch with reality. It becomes like that Japanese soldier who was lost in the jungle until like 1967. And then they found him, and they were like, the war's been over for years. And he refused to believe it, because he'd been stuck in his mission, and he stayed inside the mission. That was his perspective, his worldview. Now, how does this relate to something like a culture? Well, I think it's very important to study psychosis in order to understand these, because, of course, what a culture is a collection, a conglomerate of billions of brains all at once. And so the problems in the brain in an individual sense are definitely going to probably manifest in some way on a collective sense. That would make sense to me. I think that would make sense to everybody. That's like, it's coming out of the brain. It must be the case. So if you run with this idea, what can often happen to people is they can get trapped up in delusional stories that don't work for them. Now, you look around and you ask yourself, well, do you think it's possible that a society could get trapped in a delusional story that does not work for them? And of course, the answer would be yes, it certainly could.
Yeah.
Now, even if you, maybe let's actually take Sam Harris's side here for a second and say to him, all right, well, let's sit down with Sam Harris and be like, Sam, do you believe that Christianity was wrong? It was the wrong perspective in the world? And he'd probably be like, yes. And it's like, well, how did people get obsessed with that for 2,000 years? Like, that's not a trivial amount of time. And you're not allowed to do the cop out and say that they were stupid. That's not fair. That's not being accurate. Probably what happened is that these people got caught up in some type of perception, like a frame, a worldview. And then it was like the worldview was like the unconscious dream that they lived in, and in their left brain, their ego gets deployed inside the worldview, and then they go and run and live inside that worldview and do all their stuff from the context of that worldview. And this is why you see, for example, they would go and they would conquer all of South America and put many people to death in the name of Jesus, like these type of things. Because within the worldview, you're going to try to do your mission, and you're going to take whatever worldview it is and make it work for your whatever you need in that type of sense. I'm going to try to wrap this up in some type of convenience if I can.
Go ahead. I love it. Keep going.
Now, the final question is, well, what is the ideal? What's the proper way that these two hemispheres should be working? Well, they actually work in tandem, like a soldier and a general. So the soldier calls up the general, and the general gives the soldier the way of seeing the world and the mission and the goal. Okay, this is how you should see the territory, and then this is what you should do. And then the soldier sits down and takes the orders and makes a plan in order to get the orders done. So it's almost like the general decides the strategy and the soldier decides the tactics. It's a very, very simple way of thinking. Yeah. You're like, all right, what's the big picture? And then the general says, this is the big picture. The soldier who's not in touch with that can't see the big picture and gets caught in delusions. My proposition about what psychosis might be. Oftentimes psychosis is triggered by immense amounts of stress, or for example, smoking a lot of cannabis, which causes propensity towards delusions, these type of things. So you get massively stressed, you get snapped like a soldier who's got shell shock, you get snapped in your ego, you lose touch with reality, and you get stuck in a dream for a while. So then the question is, how would these properly function? The soldier go out and would do a mission, and then when the mission goes wrong or the mission goes right, the soldier would pause and then come back in contact with the general and see the big picture, and then pop back into the mission and go do another mission again. And each mission would have a sort of worldview coming along with it. This is the way you should see the world, and this is what you should forget and whatnot. And so what it seems like happened in the West, and it's happened in societies all the time, is that there comes a certain point where maybe even unconsciously, we decide that we need to enact a mission of some sort. What do I mean by that? Well, the worldview of Christianity was that the world was already saved. Christ had come and history was over. And all we need to do is to sort of just live out calmly the remainder and let the clock wind down. We've already won type attitude. Now, this is very, very beneficial in thousands of different ways, and very, very restrictive in thousands of different ways. There's always a good, an up and a down to any perspective. And so this perspective on the sort of yearning for the past paradise, and I know obviously Revelations and all that, but we'll talk about that in a moment. But yearning for the past and paradise kind of holds you back a bit, but it actually grounds you and anchors you a little bit and stops you having to do wild progressivism like building cities and stuffing everybody inside offices and ruining their natural connection to the world and all this. And so Christianity kept them in that worldview. But then what comes along in the West is a change of perspective, a vision, a new worldview where it's like, all right, what's actually happening in the world is that we are in hell. We don't live in God's kingdom or anything like that. Maybe it's Christianity distilled into its essence. We live in hell right now, and we need to escape hell. We need to get out. We need to progress towards a place where there is no pain and no suffering. We need to escape from this. And so what happens then is that the idea is that we're going to figure this out ourselves. That's the sort of worldview that the unconscious general of the West conceptualized. We're going to figure this out ourselves. And we didn't really know this was happening, but this is what happened. And Nietzsche coined this as the death of God. That's what he called it. And then what happens then is the little ego, the left brain, all of our left brains together, the ego of the West. When this story from the general changes, the ego from the West accepts that idea and says, right, what we're going to do is the plan is now we're going to have to try shuttle out of this reality, symbolized best in fucking rocket ships and shit like that. You know,
exactly.
Shooting out of reality. And what happens is, so we get obsessed with progressivism. We get obsessed with progressivism. And I don't mean like in the political sense, although that's a consequence of this, but I don't mean in the political sense. I mean in the sense of like the general worldview. Everybody sort of agrees in progress in some way or another. Technological progress, social progress, societal progress, same thing. And there's all this belief that we're all going to become transhuman technopagans at the end of time. That's the sort of visionary conception of where we're going. And no one can tolerate the idea of like, oh, we're just fine as we are. Why don't we just sort of accept Jesus and stay still? But that was actually the common perspective of the vast majority of religions in the past. The Hindu religion has the idea of the Yurgas and essentially says progress is bad. The Celtic paganism, same thing. The Christianity has that sort of implicit in it, but not. It's a bit more complicated. But I'm going to go simple for the time being. And then what you see happening with us, obviously, is that like rapid assertion that the state of the world is bad and we must shoot out and escape. And this opens up a lot of different issues because that fundamental worldview is the root of the intellectual paradigm. And as much as we want to talk about intellectual stuff, we can't until we actually unearth the worldview, until we have a serious conversation about the urge inside of us to progress, the urge inside of us to escape reality. We'll never be able to intellectually like disprove it and tell you won't be able to tell Sam Harris that he needs to reconsider religions, because Sam Harris is so unconscious of these superordinate myths that are driving him that he won't even be able to comprehend that. He'll just think you're stupid. He'll just dismiss it in some sense. Whereas if you really wanted to dance with these ideas, and it's pretty hard to do it, you want to be looking at it in some sense of maybe even using that brain science to help you of the ego and the unconscious, and the ego and the right brain, whatever. And these two things have a function, and right now they're currently in the midst of performing the function of the ego deployed as the soldier to go achieve a goal. And maybe this is the scary part. Maybe we've become delusional and we're like the psychotic ego at this point, and we need to get snapped out of it or something like that. So
yeah.
I said
I just want to jump in here because like, yeah, like that was amazing. Like, woo, like kept going, but like I know we have limited time, but yeah, I mean, like again, I got the same problem with Sam Harris. Like he seems like honestly, he's very Spurgy. Like he's extremely left brain. He's like, if it's just this and this, then we can figure this out. I'm like, Sam, you're a lost cause. And like when you like for example, like if you listen to like his debate with Jordan Peterson, you can see they're just talking past each other when it comes to truth. And it's just like he has one conception of truth and Jordan has the other conception. It's like they're just not coalescing. And like I love the whole bicameral mind hypothesis. For those who are unaware, it was coined by psychologist Julian James in his 1976 book. It basically states that around 3,000 years ago, the right, like the way that human quote unquote consciousness is, we weren't really conscious. It was more so the right hemisphere will like send auditory hallucinations to the left hemisphere, and like the left hemisphere would just be like, okay, like exactly the general and the soldier, and they would just go. Like there would be like no debate. There would be no quote unquote consciousness.
I was going to put in and say that's what God was like. Like if you read the Bible, that's what God's appearance is like.
Exactly.
Sorry,
And that's what can be posited as the birth of religion. It was like these hallucinations in the brain. It's like, and when people have like, you know, like Muhammad, he had like, you know, or like anyone have like these, they have something just channeled into them. It could be interpreted as like this, the right brain just like screaming something, some story into the left brain, like, okay, and just putting it out into the world. And like this was covered in like Westworld's the Westworld series on HBO, about how like the whole plot line of Westworld is like you have these androids, and like it was programmed into them, like they were trying to bootstrap consciousness via these auditory hallucinations into them, and they'd be like, oh, who is this talking to me? And then all of a sudden it's just like, oh, just like it's me. And then all of a sudden they have their own framework, they have their ego after having these hallucinations all the time. And where I like to go with this is like at the Stoa, like you were at the Stoa, you had the session, and I'll link people who haven't been to that amazing session. And Peter Limberg, he talks a lot about the daemon, about being possessed by it, of how like the Stoa is being like channeled through the daemon, and whatever the daemon tells him is he's putting it to being. And I kind of see it as like, that's the right brain speaking. And like, and when you talk about how schizophrenia, how we could kind of look at the world and kind of like these hallucinations is possibly just being the right brain, just I don't know, just like coming back into the fore and just screaming at him. And like Peter Limberg openly talks about having these about his psychotic breaks, you know, like in his letters, he's like, I just had a psychotic break. I just went nuts and I just like smashing my head on the ground. I like he was being possessed by something. I was like, wow. And here's the thing with me, like I haven't had any really quote clear-cut breaks, but I feel like I'm like slightly and moderately crazy all the time. And the way that I look at it is like, I look at it as like, I'm like channeling the universe. Like what I do is like several times a day, I just put my hand over my heart and my gut, and I just breathe in. And I just channel the universe, and I just accept, and I let whatever just flow through me. And that's how everything I'm doing right now is coming up. And I see it as like, not just even the right brain, I see it as like the universe. And this dovetails what we were talking about before, how like, if you could get the hemisphere in sync, you could possibly project out and possibly let something else flow in. So I'm just wondering if you have any specific thoughts on that, like, real quick.
Well, you've put up a load of very, very interesting things there. Like, for example, first of all, I would offer people the suggestion of not using the word religion, because it's very, 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 very problematic to. For example, I would be an assassin of jargon. I do not like just concepts in general. I would be sort of some type of barbarian grug that's proposing that we simply dismiss the framework of language entirely and start from scratch to see where we can go. Yeah. But one example of that would be the use of the word religion, like the very famous thing coming from the new atheist dudes. And I know we rag on them dudes a lot, but I guess they deserve to be rag on because they put themselves up there and they were wrong. and that's actually a serious problem if they're that wrong about this stuff. They propose the idea that like the religious-minded thinking, the religious thinker, and Jordan Peterson has done great work in exposing this. It's like there's no such thing as someone who doesn't think, quote unquote, religiously, but that's not even worth discussing, because that's falling into the frame. What do people mean by religious? And precisely it's what I'm saying as before. It seems like the right hemisphere, as the general, has his job is to look out and see a sort of perspective on the world. He looks out and he sees, like, all right, what's important right now? And then he takes that perspective and he sort of like says, all right, well, this is the way of looking at the world and that's the goal. So he looks out of his bunker and he sees that, all right, we need to take out the cannons. And so he says, what matters most right now is the cannons, and the entire world focuses on the cannons. And then he goes over and he calls up the soldier and says, get the cannons. And so what happens is the soldier gets stuck inside a worldview, which is like cannons bad, us good, or something like that. And that would become, that's literally like the soldier's religion, if you want to think about it, his way of seeing the world. And what's so fascinating about the left brain and the ego is that it's brilliant at sitting down once it has a worldview and says, I want to take out those cannons. It is amazing at figuring out how to destroy the cannons. Then it will sit down and it will like worm through all these thousands of trenches and it will just nuke the cannons, like get rid of the cannons. Brilliant, great job. But the left brain, it's almost like the left brain cannot. It's got problems with actually changing that perspective. So once it's like a hamster on a wheel, once it's got that way of seeing the world, it's stuck inside of that. Now, what's fascinating about that is because this right brain, this unconscious, its job is to just shift perspective. So what happens then is once the cannons are gone, it changes really quickly. And it says, all right, now we're going to go for the soldiers there in the house to the next of it. The worldview changes. And then it calls up the soldier and boom, new religion, new perspective, new way of seeing the world, and then boom, onto that type of thing. And so the best way to understand what happens when you look at the world religiously, you look at it that way, is that you're stuck inside a perspective. Nietzsche described this phenomenon as perspectivism, the problem where everybody has a perception, and it's very, very, very important that we understand the validity of that. And now I believe this right brain stuff sort of explains to us why these type of things were valid, is because it seems like it's a function of the brain to the right brain creates a perspective and gives it to the soldier. And so someone like Sam Harris is in a perspective, you could call it the Enlightenment perspective, the post-Enlightenment, very shallow thinking perspective that we're all going to progress to the utopia of well-being, which is the proposition. Now, of course, this is a religious perspective with religious theses, and this is what Jordan Peterson, I believe, is really trying to do with Sam. Intelligently, was trying to get him to dig down to his fundamental principles, but he couldn't get him to do it because Sam was not capable. And this sounds so mean on Sam. Like, I kind of like him a bit, like, but he's not capable. He wasn't capable of inspecting his own premises because he's an ego, and he wasn't capable of inspecting the entire nuance of the fact that he's stuck inside of a perspective. He wasn't able to do that. He wasn't able to see his unconscious bias, which is that well-being is the best thing ever, because he was just sort of like, it just has to be, doesn't it? Yeah. And then someone like Nietzsche, if you want to understand him, would propose, this is what's probably the main thesis of his writing, is that concept of well-being being like the general sees the cannons and says the goal is cannons. Sam Harris looks out and he sees the goal is well-being. And Nietzsche would propose and look out and see the goal should be excellence. And so there's the different perspectives littered all among those. And they're sort of like our current programs or religions that are running right now, and we're certainly trapped within those, and it's a very, very fascinating thing, because if you actually become conscious of this process going on, it allows you to actually pull back and not get caught up in it, and you realize that 89% of people or 99% of people are completely stuck inside these paradigms, and not to like put them down, like it's just the way the world is. And it's kind of scary. It's like how these things are just going to play themselves out then, it seems. And what happens is if we can step back and see this process and actually intelligently critique our perspective and maybe even establish a communication with this unconscious, does that mean that we can kind of pull back and become more conscious of the entire thing? And maybe does that give us the power to actually direct this entire rigmarole? to the direction that we wanted to go. And all these different questions come up then at that point, like what do we want to, where do we want it to go to, and how does all that stuff come up? But if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, exactly. The general, exactly. Get the general back in charge. Hello. He's like, where he's been missing. And again, like this is amazing. Like there's like 8 million more questions we're unfortunately not going to get into because I know we're short of time, but like something that I'd really like to get in next, I'm sorry, it's coming maybe from a selfish point of view, but actually it may go even deeper than that, and possibly it could have some more value because again, like you're very much into Jung's work, Carl's work, and like his archetypes and all that, and like that's something I've really been getting into lately about like these fundamental archetypes of which like we're manifesting. And like the philosopher Alexander Bard, like he breaks down the human population into 4 categories. He says like, this specific framework is he has 92% reside in the matriarchy and patriarchy, 46, matriarchy, patriarchy. Then there's like a 4% androgynous who like occupy the liminal space between the matriarchy and patriarchy. And then there's also the 4% are the shamanic caste. And now with the shamanic caste is the way he puts it, they're like the crazy go-betweens between all the various tribes, the ones that are just dancing to the beat of their own drum. And like, they just, it's like, they don't fit in. And like this, what's very interesting and actually how it relates to me historically, shamans, these ones who like channel, the spirits, are the go-betweens between the various types and trying to bring everyone together. It's like they've been celibate. And now that's very interesting because I'm going to let something, if people have listened to any of my previous episodes, they'll know this weird part about me. I'm voluntarily celibate. Not only that, I'm 36 years old. I'm still a virgin. Voluntarily, I've never been in a romantic relationship in my life. So I'm like, wait a minute. Is this a coincidence?
Storing that juice.
Yeah, that juice. And I'm like, exactly. So I'm like, what is your take on that? Like, is this all a coincidence? Or is this something deeper?
No bitch is worth your juice. That's what I think. Good job. Yeah, keep that stuff to yourself. That's yours.
No fap is nothing hoes. For me. Yeah, no fap's a lifestyle.
Tell them hoes. Tell them hoes are not getting them. Tell them,
yeah.
No way. No to hoes. This is a boys' space, girls.
No
Please
way.
Turn off the stream, girls.
Yeah, you better be on point if you're gonna get some of this juice. I
don't even know. I don't.
Is it just so crazy that you can't even figure something?
No. I've met many dudes who are into the nofap stuff, and I've come to appreciate the idea of reserving your sexual power as much as you can. I've come to learn that it's a very, very important thing. The libidinous urge is at the root of the body, if you will. The libido is the functional energetic force that drives the mind, the nervous system, if you want. You can think of it like electricity. It's the same thing, if you want to put it that way. Maybe that's kind of jumping, that's going a bit far, but it's sort of, you could think of it that way. The electricity that shoots through your body, it's like the libido, the creative force. And obviously if it appears in your lower chakra, it drives you towards lust. And if you obey that lust, you create a kid, which is good. And then the same as if it appears in your heart and you obey that feeling, that electricity, that buzz you get in your heart, what will happen is you will want to bond with people. You create a community and friends and family, which is good. And then if it appears in your brain, it will create thoughts and thinking patterns, and it will drive you towards conceptualization and art, which is good as well. All these things are good. Now, if you want to talk about what Bard was saying, I'm going to maybe put a different frame, but you could talk about the archetype of the caste system. Now, it's obviously a little bit controversial, but it's nonetheless a natural representation of human inequality that always manifests no matter what. It's currently in our society as the rich, the middle class, and the poor. In India, it was the Brahmins, and then you had the warriors, and then you had the sort of workers, and then you had underneath that the untouchables. In ancient societies, it was the same thing. The Indo-European caste is very famous. You had the upper class, the kings, if you want, the royalty or the aristocracy, and then sort of like the warriors, and then the peasants. And this stuff always appears in this type of way. Now, the thing that's most fascinating about this comes from the related to sexuality is why is the priests always on top? That's the thing that's always so interesting. Why are the priests usually, why are there usually Brahmins on top? Like, what's going on there? It's a very, very strange idea. You'd imagine the kings would be on top, and kings certainly are pretty high status, but they tend to be cooked by the priests. It's usually what's the situation. And so you ask yourself some serious questions, because why are the religious types up there? Well, it's probably because knowledge is power, as they say. Knowledge is the supreme form of power. It's the most important thing. Nietzsche talked about this an immense amount. Like, why do we have priests as leaders? Why do we have knowledge workers as leaders? Well, because they are the only ones who are capable of thinking. It's almost like naturally we would select for the highest IQ people to rule. That's sort of what it is. The Pope was ideally would always be your smartest person, and they would be connected to something extreme. They're like actually forming the role of the right brain general, if you want to think about it that way. Yeah. They retreat up into this caste that almost no one experiences, and they go into these secret rooms and they talk, and they're connected deeply with the huge perspective of, like, you know, the religion, which is almost always thousands of years old, and they're guardians of that perspective, and therefore the people contained within that, and they become the sort of they become the sort of characters that move that. And so they're sort of like the general, and they come down, they tell the kings what to do and the peasants what to do. So they're sort of like the right brain coordinating everything. Ideally, it's actually a very, very intelligent idea, an important idea. Now, what's so interesting about this caste system and these Brahmins is the Platonic idea of the philosopher kings, the idea of the rulers, the sort of right brain general Brahmins, the priests, were supposed to be, well, first of all, sexually conservative at the very least, because you don't want to be running around like a grug, just kind of hanging it out there, banging whatever you see. That's a lower form of consciousness. That's too impulsive. That's not indicative of big long-term thinking. And so what is asserted is that, well, what the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church was, as Nietzsche said, Platonism for the people. The Catholic Church was actually premised on the idea of these elites. They would be, at the very least, monogamous, and eventually it became entirely celibate. They would be people who are dedicated fully to this sort of intellectual perspective on things. And so the Brahmin caste of Europe, for a long time, the Catholic Church was entirely, no nuts for life type vibe. That was the thing that was going on. Now, this is a fascinating and interesting innovation, because in some sense it's a little bit anti-life, which is scary. But in other senses, it does something which Nietzsche noticed, that when you hold in all the juice, it shoots up into your head and turns into like this tension and desire for excellence and power. And sometimes it can go quite dark and turn into this like celibate, creepy need for power, like you see in Game of Thrones. Yeah. And other times it can turn into this exceptional ability to be energized about something abstract, which is ideally what you're aiming for. Now, I'm afraid I'm like a little bit short on time, so I can't go into this stuff much more. Yeah. But I will leave you with some good quotes. First of all, like Freud went no nut for life at 40, told his wife he'd never bang her again. So that was pretty ruthless. And then another one was Nietzsche. I have a feeling Nietzsche probably didn't fap that much either. No. And he, for example, talked about stuff like where the semen is absorbed by the blood. What will happen is you'll feel the semen like fire in your body, and you'll be like energized. And he proposes that was a big deal. So you can think of Nietzsche like not fapping for like months and getting all frenzied on all the energy inside of him and writing down these crazy Nietzsche thoughts. And that, I think that gives a whole new context into a lot of his work.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's validating a lot of what I'm thinking. Like my friend Tia, she's been helping with tantric breath, and she's been telling me how, like, usually men, when she works with men with doing the tantric breath and breathing up through the chakras from the root and into the crown, usually they have to work on the upper chakras, like the heart on up, because like they're usually very grounded, but it's like the heart and the love that they have to work on. She said with me, like, I'm the exception to the rule. Well, like, I have to work on my root chakra, my perineum up to here, because like it's this where it's like I need work on. But so it's like that's just my unique thing. So all right, thank you so much for coming on, Stefan. So, I just want to know where can people find out more about you and all your amazing stuff you're doing over there?
So pop over to Uberboyo on YouTube. I think that's the best place to check it out. A lot of people like the video I did in the Red Book. I released a video recently called Carl Jung on Individuation. I think that would actually give probably the best intro story to who I am. So I think you quite like that. So check that one out.
That's it. Again, Uberboyo, the juiciest boy on the web right now. He's killing it. Jung, Nietzsche, getting meaning in your life. Anti-nihilism. He's fighting against the dark forces of entropy. Okay. Again, thanks so much, Steph. Uberboyo. And that's it, everybody, for another episode of Noetic Nomads. Peace out and step up, because the world needs you. Bye. All right.
Thank you very much. Cheers, brother.